Hello everybody, this is some random Neko, waking up from her nap to greet the world for the day. And by greet, I mean continue my quest to remind the world of other Snow White adaptations that exist in order to distract from the disaster that is Disney's Snow White, which I still will not watch yet. So next on the scales of judgment, we have Snow White and the Huntsman, and it is certainly an interesting take on the tale of Snow White. Queen Ravenna, who seized control of her kingdom by marrying and killing its rightful ruler, needs the life force of young maidens to maintain her beauty and magic. However, to truly rule forever, Ravenna must take the life of Snow White and consume her heart. When Snow White escapes captivity, Ravenna sends a huntsman to capture her. Unfortunately, she never anticipated that the huntsman would spare Snow White's life, allowing Snow White, the huntsman, and a rebel army to join forces to destroy Ravenna once and for all in order to bring balance back to the land. Despite how epic the summary might make it sound, the story of Snow White and the Huntsman is actually really meh. Though the sequence of events was at least interesting enough to not make me bored out of my mind, and I liked how Snow White actually gets to see the effect Ravenna has, not just on her people, but on the land as a whole, and how it's the land itself, not just the people, that establishes Snow White as Ravenna's antithesis. Ravenna as the evil queen is a really fascinating character. She's got depth and a tragic backstory that you only get to see glimpses of. She's kind of like 2014's Maleficent in the sense that her circumstances are what lead her to becoming the evil queen. But unlike Maleficent, she never formed a connection with Snow White and only doubled down on her actions, using her past as justification while spiraling further into madness caused by her obsession with power. The magic mirror is also a fascinating element that's used to portray that spiral and soothe her ego, instead of being an extension of her magic. Snow White, however, despite being Ravenna's antithesis, is meh. She's an action over words kind of character, but the build-up to her actions is minimal, and when she speaks, it's minimal as well. There is way too much open-mouth staring going on her part, which just reminds me of Bella Swan, which is a great time to tell you all that this film actually came out during the midst of the Twilight Saga. So the production team really did Kristen Stewart dirty by just basically making her reprise her role as Bella in Snow White and the Huntsman. But at least this time she has some sort of agency, and while she doesn't quite become a warrior so much as use that agency to fight back against someone who destroyed her life and threw her into a cell to rot for years, it's at least more than what Bella did throughout the majority of Twilight, so I guess that's a win? Finally, we've got Eric, the huntsman, who is also a fascinating character, though not with as much depth and backstory as we get with Ravenna. The film made me curious enough to want to learn more about him and how he gets to where he is beyond, "My wife died and now I drink myself to get 1 foot into the grave." But I guess we do kind of get that in The Huntsman Winter's War, but this isn't a review of the prequel sequel, so we're just gonna ignore that for now. As for the relationship between Snow White and said huntsman, it isn't really that well established. The foundation is set for a bond to form between them, sure, but they never add anything to it except for a comparison of Snow White to Eric's wife, which doesn't really do much to help foster the romantic relationship the film tries to imply. In all honesty, William, Snow White's childhood friend, has way more romantic chemistry with her, and they weren't even able to interact that much in the film, which I think is a shame. However, I will give kudos to the film for having an interesting magic system with an established set of rules they actually follow, instead of just tossing it out the window halfway through. Though there does need to be some thought put in to understand the connection Snow White has to magic, I still appreciate the effort to at least establish some rules instead of just saying, "It's magic, so who cares about anything beyond the bare bones concept of magic give, magic take." There is also a lot of symbolism going on that adds another layer to the story, like the 3 drops of blood being part of a ritual that ends up tying Ravenna and Snow White together, with the circumstances of both rituals highlighting the difference in their subsequent fate and connection to magic. I also love how things have meaning and aren't just thrown in there to be thrown in there just because. That things that seem inconsequential do come back to have a significant meaning or an impact on the story, like how the huntsman's first and only lesson in combat to Snow White aids her in the final battle. In addition, the film is visually striking. It's got a sense of grandness to it that reminds me a little of Lord of the Rings, though it's not as wide of a world in comparison. The scenery is stunning, with each location having its own unique aesthetic that allows us to easily differentiate one from the other, especially since there's actually good lighting despite the dark tone of the story. I feel like nowadays, decent lighting is being avoided like the plague, where everything is just so damn dark that it's almost depressing, and you can't see anything without squinting or turning up the brightness on your screen. But here, you can still see everything clearly, even during the night scene where the only light is coming from huts catching on fire. And the special effects are amazing. All the fantastical and magic aspects of the film feel smooth and with just the right amount of uncanny valley to fit into the world we're being shown. The medieval battles are also cool, though kind of cramped, with magic thrown in to keep things interesting and to display the difference in power between Ravenna and everyone else. The orchestral soundtrack also adds to the dark high fantasy epic vibe the film is aiming for in their retelling. And I love the grotesque imagery and how it adds to the visual difference between Snow White and Ravenna, with Snow White still looking like the fairest of them all despite being worn and dirty, while Ravenna looks like someone paying the price for her pride and power despite the finery she wears. However, as you can probably tell over the course of my review, Snow White and the Huntsman is not that good of a film, despite some of the interesting ways they play with and expand on the original tale. For one thing, the film is too damn long and it doesn't spend enough of that time actually doing anything to add to the plot or get to the point. As a result, the pacing is atrocious. It was way too slow with not much going on in between to make the build-up or transition to each plot point worth the time spent meandering towards it. It also spends way too much of that time establishing everything except Snow White and her relationship with the Huntsman. Also, I don't like what they did with said relationship, which was basically nothing but compare Snow White to Eric's wife to establish an implied romantic connection, which, I know medieval times age gaps were a thing, but this is dark high fantasy, so it doesn't count in my books, thus making it dumb. I would have preferred to see the Huntsman take on a more father figure role given Snow White's actual father's dead. Then you could have had him kissing her on the forehead instead of on the lips, which was all kinds of awkward. But considering the alternate ways of true love didn't really happen until Frozen, I guess they get a pass. But it was still a missed opportunity. Also, this is a personal pet peeve of mine, but I don't like it when the trailer synopsis lies about what's actually going on in the film. The synopsis of Snow White and the Huntsman keeps calling the Huntsman Snow White's mentor in the art of war or combat, but all he does is give her one self-defense lesson, then act as her escort for the rest of the film. It was very jarring to see her going from a girl who had enough agency to make her escape, to a plot device who's literally just interacting with the world like a cursor icon to get the characters around her to rally to her cause, to being a warrior with agency again and leading her people into battle. There's no smooth transition, no training montage, nothing to explain this change other than she has to take back her kingdom because it's her duty and maybe she's also really angry at the queen. It's unclear. They just don't let Snow White say or do much of anything to establish herself as a character in her own film until the third act, which is such a waste. And the dwarves. Oh my lord, the dwarves were an absolute travesty. While they weren't the CGI fix-it attempt in Disney Snow White, they also weren't any better considering it's just average height actors digitally added onto dwarf bodies. And as we've already seen with Mirror Mirror, actors with dwarfism exist! Cast them, you cowards! Overall, Snow White and the Huntsman gets a C-. It's a film of unfulfilled potential, and potential used on elements that didn't need expansion or extra focus on. It could have been a dark high fantasy epic with the feel reminiscent of Lord of the Rings, while using the tale of Snow White as a basis, but it ended up not leaning enough into certain aspects and falling short as a result. The plot was meh, the pacing was way too slow, and Snow White doesn't quite feel like the hero of her own story. The visuals and special effects were amazing though. You could really smell that budget, but you could also really see the potential it could have had, which only led to my disappointment when it didn't fulfill even half of it. Snow White and the Huntsman? More like Ravenna featuring a girl named Snow White and some random huntsman. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Reminder that this is just my opinion, so you can take it with as many grains of salt as you want. I don't mind either way, and would love to know your thoughts in the comment section down below. Please feel free to like, subscribe, and comment which film you'd like me to give my 2 cents about next. I might do a review on the Huntsman Winter's Ward just for the heck of it, but only after I do a review on some other Snow White adaptations, just so people have more options to cleanse their minds and palates of Disney Snow White. Anyways, this is some random Neko, going off to take a nap now. Don't forget to keep calm and just meow.